We have the great pleasure of having Milena Djordjevic-Kisacanin to be with us and present a topic which was scheduled for the spring edition of our seminar series, but unfortunately it was not happening because of the pandemic situation, which disrupted a lot. But we do appreciate the fact that Milena has been so kind to be patient and to be included again in this, believe it or not, ninth meeting of the Balkan Circle for this season. And thank you very much for coming. Hopefully some of you will have also have the opportunity to present in the future. I guarantee that the incoming program also will be varied as usual and will feature multiple topics. As you know, what we're trying to do is a distribution not only in terms of the composition of our speakers, that means faculty, external speakers, practitioners, but also students, which are the center of our attention. And Milena, I'm not stalling for time. I'm just waiting for the full, as you see, more people are coming to listen. So we give them usually a minute or two to come. Meanwhile, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kirill Avramov, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. I'm also a fellow to the Intelligence Studies Project at LBJ, and I'm a co-host with Professor Newberger, an initiator of Balkan Circle, and we're very proud of our speakers and people that do participate. And we think that the regularity that we're doing it is doing a service for the people that are joining us, because there are a lot of people not only within the university, but also outside of the university. Now, at this point of time, I'm trying to see, if everyone was able to join us, at least, the core of the people that usually come, but I see some new faces and names. So welcome to Balkan Circle. And having this, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce one of our students, Milena, with a very, more people coming, that's good, with a very interesting topic. Which will basically cover more than, and hopefully will, talk about multiple layers of identity and not only a singular country, but more. So Milena, without further ado, I would like you to take your speaker spot today and talk to us about this very interesting and fascinating topic. And thank you again for coming and being so patient with us.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who came today. I understand how screen fatigue can just, exhaust you with all of our classes being over Zoom. So I appreciate it even more that you came to yet another Zoom presentation. But I hope that you enjoyed and that you learned something today. So first of all, can I just ask how much time I have approximately and how much time is reserved for questions, just so
Absolutely.
I know how to pace myself?
Milena, you have about 45 minutes, the standard time for our speakers to present your work. And the rest of it is usually about 15 or so minutes for questions from the auditoria through moderation, or, as we have today, people, might ask you directly questions as well. But you have your 45 minutes. Milena?
Perfect. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen for my PowerPoint. Let's see. All right, here we are. Let me know if everybody can see this, if it's all smooth. So the name of my presentation is, okay, here it is. Returning Home, Bosniak Migrants in Turkey. And kind of as a subheading, how to do human subjects research during a pandemic. So this project essentially is going to be my thesis. I even wanted to start it before I got around writing the thesis and kind of make my thesis an expansion of this project. But because of the pandemic, it was very difficult to pace the project the way I wanted to. And I've had to make substantive revisions to the methodology because I use a lot of like interviews for the project, and of course the IRB has decided that that's not ethical, and of course it's not. I don't want to get people sick. So yeah, I hope that you enjoy hearing not just about, let's say, the subject, but also the process in which I came to sort of like create this project.
Thank you very much, Milena. I think this will be very valuable, and actually we're thankful that you were presenting your thesis, but also you'll be talking about methodology, which is a central issue for some of the research, and some of the speakers which are academically engaged at this point.
So I first want to start out by showing you several maps. I'm a personal fan of maps, and I think they kind of tend to make things more interesting because you get a sense of what's happening and what's moving around. So on the left side, the very top left map is a map published in France in the very late 19th century. And it represented, this is like the French Society for Armenian Affairs. It created a map of Turkey with by noting what percentage of the population is Muslim versus Greek versus Armenian within Turkish cities. And as you can see, there are quite a lot of, so it's quite a diverse country. Although there's a lot of Muslim people, there's quite a large Christian population. And the map below that also notes this fact. As you can see, now I'm not sure to what extent we can accurately make a map. This map anyway represents 1910 in Anatolia. I'm not sure to what extent we can make an accurate map because identity in this part of the world was so flexible during this time, and censuses could be quite complicated. But overall, the thing that we can observe is that there's quite a large Armenian, Christian, Greek minority. Now, looking at the map on the right-hand side, we can see that the demographics have significantly shifted. The Christian minority is almost gone. There's maybe a very, very small Armenian minority in like the southeast, but overall, this is a very large change. And this kind of change doesn't happen with like naturally smoothly. It's usually a very violent process. So the thing I'm trying to get at here is that our part of the world, so the Balkans and Turkey, have experienced a lot of dramatic population changes within the past, let's say, century, and a lot of these processes have been violent. Now, with that said, often when people talk about identity and multiculturalism, they focus on this very violent sort of, suppression of minorities, violent migrations, etc. But very few research focuses on less problematic minorities. So in the face of a lot of problematic minorities of Turkey, the Armenians, the Greeks, etc., who've experienced really terrible violence in the past century, it's really interesting to look at the minorities who have really successfully integrated into the Turkish nation state. And one of these minorities are the Bosniaks. So that brings me to the research problem of my presentation. So as we've seen, the Turkish nation state has a lot of historically problematic minorities, but Bosnians, who are a South Slavic Muslim minority, have very successfully integrated into this country. They have their own organizations, they have their own festivals. The picture I've chosen is of a really interesting, like a kind of meeting, and the symbolism that you can see here, putting both the symbolisms of the Bosnian minority and the Turkish minority, is really interesting in the face of the history I've told you a little bit about. So I hope that by looking at reasons, by analyzing reasons why Bosnians have managed to so successfully integrate into the Turkish nation state, this project might further expand understandings of when multiculturalism does work, and just more broadly expand understandings of ethno-nationalism and its workings. So just a little bit of a recap, because this is a really interesting and complicated history. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the late 19th and 20th centuries, This collapse involved a lot of violence because one of the prevailing ideologies of this time was nationalism, and that if you have a minority, they can serve as a fifth column within your own state. So this is why we see various violence direct towards Armenians. We see events like the 1955 anti-Greek pogrom, and a lot of these events continue even into the modern day. So even a lot of Muslim minorities like Kurdish people have had fairly recent clashes. So the picture at the bottom left represents this. It was sort of like, it was almost a domestic war which happened within Turkey in the 1990s, and this is a clash between the state and like local villagers. At the same time, there was a lot of violence experienced within the Balkans, which led to people just leaving with what little they had from the Balkans, usually Turkish Muslims or Slavic Muslims, and moving to Turkey. So a lot of these pictures just illustrate this, again, very painful process. These are Muslim villagers just leaving their villages with what little they had. They gathered in mass in cities like Istanbul, and then they would continue on to settle within Anatolia. So this is just a little bit of the background, which sort of informs the broader context of this project.
Milena, sorry to interrupt. The images that we're seeing currently are of Muslims. Is that Bosniaks in Turkey? Those images particular on this slide? Or they're just an assortment of displaced people?
So these in particular are an assortment of people, and the project, in fact, is mostly about the post-World War II migrations. So, however, this does inform the context of how Bosnians are received within Turkey, and it kind of serves as like the context of what was happening before they decided their migration. But I believe that the two pictures on the left are in fact Bulgaria, like from modern day Bulgaria. However, the pictures on the right are just, as you mentioned, a general assortment of refugees from the Balkan Wars.
Thank you for the clarification. I didn't want to, interrupt, but it was important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. So now I just want to give a little bit of historical context of Bosnian migrations. Again, the region that we work with is very complicated, and there's all of these names, ethnicities, and so on. Essentially, there's the country of Bosnia, which is highly diverse, and it includes Christians and Muslims of various denominations. But Bosniaks are specifically like a South Slavic Muslim ethnic group, mostly from the former Yugoslavia. And within this map of the former Yugoslavia, they're represented by the sort of green areas. So I've sort of circled. This, the red circle, which just popped up, represents sort of where the Bosnians are most located within Bosnia. However, this project will mostly deal with Bosnians from another region, that is the Sandžak of Serbia, which again I've not circled. It's so this is within modern day Serbia and also modern day Montenegro. It's a region split between these two countries. So with that said, the Bosnians of the Balkans have had a historically complicated identity because within the Ottoman system, people were characterized mostly by their religion and not by what language they might have spoken. So this was a system called the millet system, where essentially your religion was kind of your nation. And that meant that, let's say, Bulgarians, Greeks, and a lot of other Christians were within the Christian millet. And Muslims, such as Bosniaks, Albanians, etc., Turks, were within the Muslim millet. So within this kind of system, when these countries began transitioning into modern nation building, which involved having your nationality as your main identity, it was kind of a complicated process. So people sort of switched between different groups or certain, let's say, like a lot of the people in modern day Sandžak, this region which we'll be concerned with in modern day Serbia, actually came from, let's say, an Albanian background and might even have a name that's kind of obviously Albanian in origin, but they might consider themselves Bosniaks. So it's kind of a complicated process of consolidating different identities, but essentially today these people call themselves Bosniaks. They speak usually the Bosnian language, which is similar to Serbian and Croatian. And these were also people who migrated to Turkey and or other places around the Balkans where it was safer for them during the 19th and 20th century conflicts, such as the Balkan Wars. Just in case any of you guys are familiar with probably the most famous book to come out of Yugoslavia, The Bridge on the Drina River, the author actually describes a lot of the migrations which took place as different parts of Serbia were, well, let's say, liberated or like broke free from Ottoman power, and how a lot of Bosnian refugees, or let's say they call themselves Muslims or Turks in that book, migrated to other parts of the country. So just like an interesting literary note, if in case you guys are familiar with that work. But yeah, so after these initial migrations, after the Second World War and the formation of the Socialist Federalist Republic of Yugoslavia, many Bosnians from this region that, again, I circle within Serbia, migrated to Turkey. And this project mostly concerns them and their formation of identity. So in the 1950s, Turkey and Yugoslavia signed an agreement. This came out of a period where these countries in the Balkans, such as Greece, Yugoslavia, Turkey, were signing increasing agreements to sort of defend themselves from Stalin's influence. I think that one of the agreements that came out of this was allowing the Turks within SFR Yugoslavia, which are mostly from Macedonia, to emigrate to Turkey. So this was an option open to only ethnic Turks, because in this time, people were not yet allowed to leave Yugoslavia. However, many Bosnians who wanted to leave first moved from Sandžak to Skopje in Macedonia, and there lived for a period of time in order to change their identity so that they could officially become Turks and migrate further into Turkey. And I just wanted to show you some pictures. This always helps me kind of understand the context of a place. So on the right, the first photo is just showing a view of Novi Pazar, which is today the sort of cultural capital of this region of Sandžak. And just some things to notice, the kind of architecture that you can still find here is just sort of very traditionally Ottoman, sort of these low houses with wide roofs, sort of like still a very prominent bazaar today. A lot of surviving Ottoman architecture and mosques where they might not have survived in other parts of Serbia. And the picture below that is from a village that some of the interviewees I had came from. The idea here is to just show that the people who were migrating weren't even usually from the cities, but they were from the villages. And this kind of landscape with the mountains and the fields and animals was kind of their daily experience. So once the Bosnians came to Turkey, most settled around the Marmara region, which essentially is the sort of northeastern sea. So this included big cities like Istanbul and Bursa, also Çanakkale and Kocaeli. Some of them settled further southwards into places like Izmir and Manisa. And today, based on the censuses, I guess is the word, and approximately 100,000 Turkish citizens identify as Bosniaks. Many of these are from Sandžak, and certainly the ones who most strongly identify are usually from Sandžak because they were the most recent migrants. And furthermore, but just as a note, this statistic is fairly small. However, because of the historical migrations and Bosnians marrying into, let's say, like intermarrying with Turkish people, there are estimates that approximately up to 2 million modern day Turkish people might have some form of Bosnian descent.
Much higher, right? This number much higher.
Yeah.
Than Milena, just before we go to the next slide, your respondents, could you tell us the name of the village that is close to Novi Pazar?
Yes. So this village, actually, it's called the village of Djordjevic-Kisacanin. So I don't know if you would like me to write this down, but this is actually in the Tutin area, Tutin being a city close to Novi Pazar. So it's a very interesting place. Apparently, it's one of the coldest places in all of Serbia. Just an interesting fact.
Thank you.
It's a
Yeah.
plateau.
So spectacular nature as well. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so Bosnians in Istanbul. So, of course, the biggest Bosnian community is in Turkey's biggest city, which is Istanbul. And within Istanbul itself, there are, I think, two main neighborhoods which are predominantly, or at least have areas that are predominantly Bosnian, and these are Bayrampaşa and Pendik. So not very central, but there's a lot of really interesting Bosnian imagery and symbolism when you go there. So Bosnians often intermarry with each other. However, they often marry Turkish people. And as the generations go on, there becomes a limited knowledge of Bosnian language in my experience. However, there is a lot of nostalgia towards the Balkans, not just towards Bosnian culture in Bosnia, but also more broadly towards the former Yugoslavia. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. What's also really interesting is that within Turkey, it's very uncommon to find symbols of other states. However, within these Bosnian neighborhoods, there are very, very prominent, very openly Bosnian symbols. So this is a photo like on a mosque, which has both the Bosnian and Turkish flags displayed. These are a lot of photos that I took myself, so I just thought some visual references might help break it down. On the top left, we see a car. Yeah, so it has both the like writing, the signature of Atatürk, who was the founder of the Turkish Republic. Below that, you see a very complicated sort of, I guess, coat of arms, you would say, which has the Turkish flag on the top. And then this bottom part is what's the Sandžak sort of symbol. So like this kind of coat of arms with the 3 crescent moons on the green background, as well as the fleur-de-lis, is what's used to symbolize the Sandžak region. And it also has that kind of like Bosnian sort of fleur-de-lis symbol within it. Furthermore, I saw a business which offered people rides from Istanbul to their hometown in Sandžak. It's in 2 languages. So the of course is Bosnian, the bottom is Turkish. On the right, it's not the best photo. I should have taken a better one, but this is essentially it especially says Bosna Sandžak because these people are from Sandžak. Sort of association. And then at the bottom left is my favorite one. It's the Drina restaurant. So one of the most famous books to come out of Yugoslavia is The Bridge on the Drina River, which has also become a kind of symbol of this region. So you can see the name of the restaurant, the Drina restaurant. You can see the bridge, which is the logo on either side of the words. And then my favorite part is this little red arrow points towards a map of Yugoslavia. It's kind of hard to see here, but they even put up a map of the former Yugoslavia with all the republics marked to be kind of a symbol of their restaurant. The last one is kind of a common sight in both the Balkans and Turkey. There's a dish called burek or börek. And this is a restaurant which is specifically Bosniak burek. So they sell like Bosnian style burek. But all of these are common sites in the neighborhoods. So, okay, here we come to the research problems. Oh, go ahead.
No, I bet that those are fantastic, and very, good foods. I hope you had a chance to, to try them too.
Absolutely. We didn't go to when I was there with a friend, I didn't go to the Drina restaurant. I went to it was called like Pink Panther, but even like the food, I guess the menu had like a picture of Sandžak on it. It was really interesting. And of course the food was delicious, but the interesting thing about that particular place was, you know, I'm coming into like a Bosnian establishment. So,
Mhm.
and now stereotypically Bosnians don't get along with Serbs, but there's this sort of broader phenomena of Yugo nostalgia going on. So when I entered, the TV was playing like this Serbian channel with like these Serbian turbo folk singers,
Turbo
and
folk.
everybody was just enjoying the atmosphere. Yeah, I really appreciated that like Yugo nostalgic sort of, versus just being from a particular homeland, I guess. So yeah, the research problems, well, first of all, this project wants to understand how and why Bosnians from Sandžak chose to migrate to Turkey after World War I. So yeah, why specifically Turkey? Furthermore, I want to understand why Bosnians are so well integrated in Turkish society and culture. Furthermore, sort of building on that, how Bosnians construct their identity within the framework of Turkish nationalism, and finally, how do different generations of immigrants understand their place in modern Turkey? So does this differ with, you know, like a third generation who might not speak the language versus their first generation grandparents, or is it a fairly similar stance? So, okay, here are my original planned methods, because this project initially was supposed to take place before like the pandemic even hit. I began working on this project in fall of 2019 when I was on a study abroad program in Turkey. So I did some preliminary exploration, talking to people, sort of getting a sense of what questions I can ask. But I was supposed to carry out the bulk of the research last summer, which of course didn't happen because it's probably very unethical to do research and talk to people during a pandemic. So with that said, during my exploratory phase, I carried out historical background research into the migrations. I built a literature review, and I developed a strong personal network in Turkey, especially among older generations of Bosniaks. So I visited a lot of these sort of Bosnian associations, talked to people, even in restaurants. The restaurants were, you know, Bosnian owned, so I kind of, you know, talked to them. Actually, I have to give credit to a co-researcher of mine who was supposed to be here, but he couldn't enter into this meeting. So maybe, yeah, like the
I hope
the
it's a.
authorization didn't work.
Oh, hopefully it's a technical. You know, thanks for telling us, and we should credit. Thank you for mentioning it, and I really am impressed by your ethic. And I apologize. You know, it must have been some sort of a technical problem, possibly. You know,
No worries.
because it's open and
Um,
free to the public, and you know, in order to popularize your work.
okay. Hopefully he can manage to get in before the time that we finish. But yeah, he's a student here in Turkey. So, but he's also Bosnian. So he sort of helped me find connections, and then from those connections, I found even more people. So with that said, yeah, I visited a lot of the neighborhoods. I kind of was noting what institutions kept the community together. Were there any shared newspapers they had, newsletters? When did people meet up specifically in these Bosnian organizations? And then the second part was to actually like use this exploratory phase to sort of develop a more rigorous research methodology. So for example, creating several focus groups from the older generations of Bosnians for multiple interviews, just talking to them about their migration experience and just, you know, like their experiences, life in general, framed as a kind of like, you know, like sort of looser interview. Furthermore, finding selected published materials by the Bosnian associations, interviewing people who worked there to just get a sense of what conversations were being had about identity. And then finally, employing sort of methods from spatial anthropology, analyzing the material, culture, and symbols employed by Bosnian neighborhoods in Turkey. So what kind of symbols usually symbolize like their ethnicity, and how are they used, where are they placed, and why. However, of course, the pandemic hit, and this meant that doing a lot of these things was nearly impossible. So even with just interviewing people, talking to older generations through technology was, you know, a challenge to say the least. So even when I was talking to people face to face, because just of like a different kind of political climate in this country, people might have been a little bit hesitant to, always share their like personal experiences. However, I think this would be even more difficult if I were to maybe find people to talk to through technology. So I know that one of my Bosnian friends was complaining that whenever he would call his grandparents, they would still think that the like was it like the long distance sort of calling? Like they would get scared that it was long distance, that it was going to cost a lot of money, even though that technology has been advanced. So they would always have like a quick like 5-minute hello, how are you discussion, and then like put the phone down. So
Keep it
with
short.
these kinds of cultural yeah. So with these kinds of like cultural differences at play, I think that it would be very difficult to conduct like a longer form interview maybe with older generations. So I decided instead to shift and redo my fieldwork methodology based on more young generations, to look at more social media and internet-based interactions. Okay, so just the modified plans included, instead of just talking to older people, I would focus also on younger people. Instead of just looking at like print media in the cultural centers, I would look at the social media output, and then just start analyzing like what kinds of discussions were being had online, how did people manage to organize, maybe even during the time of the pandemic. And instead analyzing material culture through going there in person, I thought it would be more ethical to just find images of this, because Google, I mean, you can find amazing things online on either on websites and see what people are using, or just using like Google Street View and kind of just going yourself through these neighborhoods and sort of noting the different kinds of symbols that appear. So yeah, so with that, all that said, I just want to get into some of my preliminary conclusions before noting what else I want to look at in the future. So far in this project, even though it's ongoing, as I haven't yet written my thesis, there are some preliminary conclusions. So the first one is essentially the reasons why people migrated. So among the older generations, the biggest reason given was fears for another Balkan conflict. If you remember, when I started out this presentation, I talked about like all of the really traumatic conflicts which took place in the Balkans, including the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, the Balkan Wars, World War I, World War II. So once World War II had ended, a lot of people thought that there would be yet another Balkan conflict. And I mean, they were right. So that's why they decided to leave and migrate somewhere else. Why did they specifically choose Turkey? Well, in the former Ottoman Empire, as I said, people were usually categorized based on their religion. So there was a sense of being among people who had your religion was sort of the safest way to go. So this is why Turkey essentially was chosen as the place. I remember interviewing one older Bosnian man, and I was kind of asking him or I think he himself had said because we feared these things, this is why we decided to go to Turkey, which was our country. And this made me really curious. So I pressed it and I said so your country, Turkey, do you identify as Turkish? And he said, no, we're Bosnians, we're Slavs, but they're kind of like Muslims, so it's kind of like our country. So it's this sort of older sense of thinking based on religious similarities versus ethnic linguistic similarities. Finally, there's the matter of economic opportunity. So parts of, I think this happens throughout all of the Balkans. There's this process of villages emptying as the youth seek out opportunities in cities where they can get what they perceive as better jobs. And this is a process that has been also happening in Western Serbia, where Sandžak lies. So a lot of Bosnians, in fact, migrated from this region to either bigger cities within the region or to bigger cities in the entire Balkans, and many of them left for either Western Europe or for Turkey. So economic opportunity was definitely important. Furthermore, regarding integration, integration seemed to not be very seamless in this process. So even though in general, like, Bosnians were able to integrate, there were many obstacles. Usually family members did not know the local Turkish language. Because in Skopje there is a Turkish minority, often the female members of the family would sometimes be sent to the Turkish school to at least get some sense of, like, to learn some Turkish. However, in general, people had to learn the language on their own. There were some forced policies like a name change. So if your name was something that was similar to a Turkish name, for example, my friend's last name was Kurtovic, they would change the ending to a Turkish last name ending. So instead of Kurtovic, it would become Kurtolu. However, if the person had a last name which could not be Turkicized, so I know some people whose last name was Yajic, practice was to give them the last name of the president, which is very strange. But so instead of becoming, like, I don't know, Yayicolu, which wouldn't be pronounceable by Turks, they became Sunay. So I guess that's like the equivalent of, I don't know, all the migrants in the United States whose names might be difficult being called Trump, which is so weird. But yeah, anyway, the reception by the local authorities was not always consistent, because although the state itself had negotiated the deals allowing them to come over, certain local authorities, so let's say policemen, were afraid that because these people came from a communist country, they were potentially dangerous, so they needed to be followed. So I heard older Bosnians say that they had a lot of fears because the police was following them around their own neighborhood, and that they felt extremely uncomfortable and unsafe because of this. Some of the neighbors, furthermore, although a lot were helpful with helping them learn the Turkish language and having sort of patience with, let's say, their children, were quite, let's say, jealous, because they believed that the state itself had given them the houses that they were living in Turkey, when in fact they had purchased the houses themselves. However, as big cities like Istanbul experienced increased Anatolian migration, so a lot of Kurdish people or Turks from the eastern parts of the country coming in, the sort of local fears around Bosnians especially diminished, and integration was, fairly straightforward and seamless. So now, the final sort of conclusion is regarding Bosnian Turkish identity and tolerance. So this former process of 19th century Balkan migrations certainly made the process easier, because the culture, the state, like, had already had a sort of similar thing happen, so that they there was already a precedent for this kind of migration. And in that time, because identity was mostly based on religion and not necessarily ethnic background, the 19th century migrants were also able to assimilate, and then that kind of opened the path for later Bosnian migration. Furthermore, the identity of Bosnians is often constructed in the sort of post-Ottoman framework, where, because of that system of identifying based on religion and not necessarily ethnicity, they felt like, they sort of belonged in Turkey, and Turkey was their country as well. And on the flip side of the coin, a lot of Turkish people had more of a sense of, because there's of course a lot of Turkish people within the Balkans, within Bulgaria and Macedonia, they might have been seeing them as a kind of Slavicized Turk. So because of this historical fluidity of identity, it was sort of easy for Bosnians to sort of redefine themselves in Turkey as a part of this country. So yeah, that's what I have so far, but I would love, and of course I have to do further investigation first into the preliminary results that I have so far, and into other things as well. So for example, I want to understand how conceptions of Turkish Bosnian identity change over second and third generations. I want to understand how does nostalgia, and especially Yugo nostalgia, factor into identity, especially for younger generations, because I have some Bosnian friends here who like very regularly listen to like Serbian music and just former Yugoslav music. So that's another thing I would want to look further into. And then finally, just looking at social media conversations and seeing how they figure into the identity, what I can learn from them. So that's essentially what I have. Special thanks goes to Dr. Newberger for her guidance and expertise. She's my advisor for my thesis. Thank you to all of my friends, acquaintances, informants from Istanbul's Bosnian community. It was, of course, like without them, the project could never happen. Like having that hospitality and openness was amazing. And thank you to, so I came to Turkey with a specific scholarship sponsored by the Dedman family of Dallas. So of course, thank you to them for just making this entire thing possible and allowing me to do research abroad. So thank you and thank you for listening, and I would love to take
Thank you very much, Milena. We would like to give you a big round of applause. Moreover, that my understanding is that you are joining us from Turkey, right, as we speak?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, yes. It's
It's a big time difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
First of all, again, thank you very much for presenting this valuable and very interesting work with us. And I want to congratulate you, first of all, on the academic bravery to take on such a complex project and to attempt to carry out the field work in a very complicated time. And we certainly do understand some of the problems that you would encounter, and it's not easy during a pandemic. So my admirations actually, and my colleagues go to you and your colleagues, some of you that have presented before, that were engaged with the region and are seeking primary information as opposed to only analyzing secondary information. So congratulations once again, for investing all of this work and applying various methods in your methodology, which is, I believe, would be reflected in the value of the final product that you will be presenting with us. Having said that, before I open the question or the discussion for questions for your preliminary findings and all the material that you have reviewed, I would use my position as a moderator today to ask the first ones while people prepare comments or questions, because I'm sure that a lot of people will be curious simply even by listening to your shared observations of working with a very, very specific and interesting group that you have selected to research. So my questions, Milena, would be when you were dealing with the first, specifically as what you refer to older generation of Bosniaks that have migrated to Turkey, have the primary conversations with them that you were carrying out in the structured interviews, have they indicated any particular assistance from the Turkish state in the form of a program for integration or assimilation that they have mentioned? And my second question would be, do you know if there was any desire on the side of the Turkish state or certain politicians for some of that population to remain on the Balkans as opposed to migrate en bloc?
So when I was interviewing people, I tried to sort of keep the questions more about their personal experience, talking to the second and third generations who were kind of familiar with culture in Western countries versus in Turkey. I learned that because the Turkish state has historically been, let's say, not as free as that in Western countries, or like it might not have been as safe to voice political opinion against the state, people were less willing to talk about that side of the coin. So I try to keep a conversation more about their local experience. Furthermore, I need to add that so far, I have done several interviews, around 10 or 12, I believe, but I wanted to do many, many more. And as my, I guess, research subjects became more comfortable with talking about this, so unfortunately, I was unable to do that. So that would have been a really interesting thing to explore and try to talk about. But so far, I have not really been able to find anything about Turkish state's attempted assimilation or anything. However, I
It was
do want to
interesting.
do, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because you mentioned something, which might be, very close to this issue or related. Maybe not, but when you were talking about Turkicizing the names, it's either indicates a voluntary course of action in order to integrate better, or it might indicate also external factors. I'm being very careful with the words here, into crafting, pathways towards better integration. And before there's just one additional thing, Milena, which is very interesting to me. When you were having those interactions with an older generation migrants versus newer ones, have you noticed social mobility, signs of social mobility in terms of unbundling and unclustering and climbing up the social ladder, or we're still seeing a heavily concentrated population in initially settled neighborhoods that you were describing and showing us on Google Earth? That is quite interesting.
Yeah, so so in my experience, you mean like clustering around their own sort of neighbors, or were
Yes,
people
yes.
trying to?
Is it always, traditional neighborhoods that remained, close-knit communities, or newer generations are able to more or less, disperse and not be so close through the initial newcomers?
So for the younger generations, I think that so the context of Istanbul is a little bit different, I would think, than some other cities. With the younger generation, certainly socially, they are very dispersed. Their friends are mostly non-Bosnians who they meet in school or in university, at least out of the people who I have talked to so far. However, regarding housing, most of the Bosnians that I know, because Istanbul is a city in which housing prices have become extremely expensive, a lot of these younger people are not really able to, I guess, afford their own apartments. Yeah, so usually they end up living with their families, who might live in a lot of these sort of concentrated neighborhoods or like these family residences. However, socially, they're very much sort of in touch with people from all over the city. So
thank you,
yeah.
Milena. Thank you for answering those. And there are the first questions coming in, and I share the sentiment, and it's from Dr. Branislav-Kisacanin, who says, great presentation. Likewise, we think it's great. And his question is, which language were your interviews in? And perhaps with older generations in Serbian and younger in Turkish. Would you please address this question? Questions, there are two of them.
Absolutely, that's actually my dad. So thank you, Dad, for that question. Yeah, but the older generations were in Serbian. Furthermore, the second generations usually were also in BCS, although sometimes this could be a struggle. So I have not really done a full-on interview with the second generation person yet. And I think that might be a complication to think about for the future. For the younger generations, I don't speak Turkish really. I kind of have learned parts of it through osmosis, just by listening to it and being exposed to it and kind of knowing both Balkan languages and Persian and so on. So that's that. However, with the younger generations, many of them know English because of their schooling, and many of them have even studied outside of the country. So that's usually the language that I've used so far. I might need to find a way to have a translator for people who might not know Serbian.
I was about to say that this might sound like a sensible strategy, especially in those restraints that you're facing. But it's something to consider further on, because I think that, as you've mentioned, and I think the question from your dad also implies something quite important, is sort of the language strategies and sort of the multiple uses. As you know, language also is tied to identity. So maybe we're looking at a very dynamic next generation, which is, in itself a phenomenon that's worth examining further on, as you have indicated in your research questions. I see that someone's coming. I hope that this is your colleague, and while we're waiting for the person to join, I'm going to invite our participants. If anyone wants to, I have multiple questions for Milena, so I can, abuse my time enough. But if any one of you would like to ask a specific question, yes, Chris Haley, please.
Yeah. Hi. Hey, thank you, Milena. That was a great presentation. I had a question about the bus service that you had that picture of buses going back and forth between Turkey. And this reminded me, I actually did some work in the early 2000s on Bulgarian Turks that were living in Istanbul and Bursa and Izmit. And there was huge amounts of travel back and forth between Turkey and Bulgaria. And so I was really interested in sort of this kind of transnational activity. And so I was curious, have you explored at all what people are doing on these return trips? Do they have houses? Like in the Bulgarian case, the Bulgarian Turks could vote in Bulgarian elections, so there was a political dimension to this beyond just maintaining familial lines and maybe dealing with property they still had in Bulgaria. So I just was curious, and I was going to say if I had pursued that further, I was going to end up doing ethnography on these buses. I would have loved to get on the bus and just hang out with people traveling back and forth. And so I was curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that awesome question. Actually, I think, so I know a lot of people who have dual citizenship between Turkey and Serbia, because again, Sandžak is in Serbia. And a lot of people find this advantageous because Serbian passports have some strengths and privileges that Turkish passports don't. They are able to enter the Schengen zone, for example. So that's why people like to have them. Furthermore, regarding activities back at home, that's definitely something that I should explore. That's a really awesome topic. So far, from talking to people, I know that people have family back at home that they're still in touch with, so they go back and they often, visit their family, visit their cousins living in like Novi Pazar or just the region. So that's one activity people do. I'm not sure about property. I do know that because of the possibilities of Serbian citizenship and the privileges that might give with like economic activity in the country. I know like family members of friends who, let's say, instead of deciding that they want to stay in Turkey, decided that they want to move to Serbia. They might have learned the language from their parents and like open, let's say, a store which sells Turkish merchandise in Belgrade, let's say, and run businesses that way. So I think, they do it. Like there are ties that are maintained because of family members, sometimes economic activities, but also the passport question is a big one. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Milena, and thank you, Chris. Milena, just to add to that, it might be worth observing something that Chris is suggesting, from your respondents, whether they do have a material base, if you will, in terms of property. It might be something resembling to what Chris was observing on his ethnography on the Bulgarian Turks. It was a big question, during the forceful relocation about property and usually the push from the state, to be sold, and this, severing the ties to, to their homeland, essentially. But it's thank you very much for answering this. This was really interesting. Michael Keel has raised hands. Michael?
Yeah, hi, my name is Michael. I'm a graduate student at the LBJ school. I guess first of all, I would just say the scope and focus is really impressive of like your project, and I really enjoyed the presentation. So I have like a quick anecdote that I think would be fun to share, and then like a question, sort of a question, but a few years ago I was in Sarajevo, and I went with a friend, and we did like a hiking tour in the highlands, like south. And so our guide was he was a Sarajevan, but he shared like a lot of these, I think not like necessarily overt attachments to Turkey, but like we were talking about the refugee crisis, and in his perspective, like Western Europe showed a lot of, I guess, hypocrisy during the Syrian crisis, because there were many Bosniaks who like went to Germany and Austria after the Yugoslav wars, but because they were white in his idea, like they were allowed to integrate, even though culturally, he as like a cosmopolitan Sarajevan was like, we're all actually a lot more similar to Turks. And so I kind of remembered that. And so I think, yeah, I find this, I guess, like sort of post-Ottoman, like Yugo nostalgia, I guess all these connections like really fascinating, and how they layer, and like even among people like in the capital and across the region, like sort of tap into that. And so my question, I guess, would then be like, for a different project, probably not really in this scope, but how Turkey's, I guess, current like narrative diplomacy, and how their outreach efforts to different like communities in the Balkans, like how that might continue, I guess, to keep these like connections and strengthen them even after like sort of older migration waves. And I guess if you are like aware of any special like outreach that Turkey has done to like southern Serbia or different Bosniak communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. That's a great thing to bring up, because now I haven't I'm not sure like what the full extent is, but from having visited different areas of Sandžak, I've seen the sort of, I guess, I think the abbreviation is TIKA. I don't know what it stands for exactly, but I think it's like the Turkish sort of like, it's some kind of like association which works with like art history and heritage. So I think that I saw that the Turkish government was, let's say, helping reconstruct or like rebuild, restore some mosques around the Sandžak area, and that they were sort of very visibly doing this kind of outreach. Like whenever there was some kind of renovation project, their sign was up next to it. The Turkish flag symbol was on these posters, which explained what was being done. So certainly there's a very visible mark that Turkey is having. And on social media, I've seen that like, I think that like Erdogan, when he visited Serbia specifically, also visited this region, which is like a very small and specific region to visit. So it's certainly like very deliberate. So yeah, I think that Turkey is certainly trying to cultivate its relationship with Bosnian communities across the Balkans, and that they've been very successful so far in doing so.
Thank you for addressing this, Milena. I think both of you actually raised a pretty significant and big political question, actually, in the field. Michael and Milena of symbolic politics, and I believe that Turkish state is actually pretty carefully monitoring and addressing those issues and those connections, as those have huge political implications. Would anyone else like to pose a question to our speaker today? If not, Milena, possibly two last questions before we let you go, because we're mindful of the time difference. And again, thank you for braving the late hours. I believe, what time is it in Istanbul right now? It is 9 o'clock?
Yeah, it's 9 right now, which isn't a problem for me. I'm a night owl anyway, so.
So, but anyhow, we're so proud actually to have those connections, constantly with our, speakers and our researchers, which are present on the Balkans. So it's not only an abstraction, but, people dealing with and being engaged with their research subjects on the spot, which is invaluable. And of course, being polyglots like yourself help a lot. So my last two questions would be purely out of curiosity. When you were observing, and I know that you said you were not still able to develop fully those connections because the pandemic, prevented, further interviews and field visits and so on. But have you observed any unique customs when you were talking about material and non-material culture that these people, have kept as unique to their identity while migrating to Turkey? And also those friendship associations, the one that we had a picture on, I remember one of the slides, with both flags and so on. What kind of work do they perform, nowadays, currently? What is their main sort of, activity? Do you know? So unique customs, or Yeah, like do the Bosniak community, observe, specific customs or things that they have kept and they preserve, even when they have integrated so well in Turkey. Have you noticed anything?
Yeah, yeah. Often when walking around a specific neighborhood, there's sometimes you will see some older women who dress in a more like there's sort of like a traditional Turkish way of dressing and a traditional
Hmm.
Bosnian way of dressing. So I was walking with a friend and we saw like these two older women with a specific style of headscarf. It's not the kind that sort of completely covers your head. It's more of like a,
Hmm.
I guess like tied behind your head
It's kind of like
style.
Zavratka of a sort.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And they had like this sort of specific kind of vest and gold jewelry on, and they looked very Balkan and kind of different from older Turkish women. So visually,
Mhm.
sometimes you can see a distinction.
So those
Um,
markers are still there that you can recognize, immediately pick it up and say, okay, well, those are things that I associate, with a different region, even in Istanbul.
Absolutely. When it comes to, let's say, food and like, cuisine, culinary culture, Bosnians make some foods that are not consumed by Turks. Let's say like there's a specific kind of pastry called mantie, which is kind of like there's manta in Turkey, which is a kind of like almost like ravioli, I would describe it. Like these sorts of
Hmm.
like sort of noodles filled with meat. Mantie are kind of like a small burek piece, if you know what burek
Hmm.
is. It's more
Yeah.
of like
Hmm.
layered phyllo dough, and then they're wrapped into like these little tiny balls, and
Hmm.
then that's kind of a manti, and then you eat several of them. So this has also been kept with regards to just material culture and practices outside of that. I guess maybe in terms of some aesthetics of how to furnish your house. I was in a
Hmm.
Bosnian house with some old rugs made in Skopje, which were kind of different from Turkish rugs, let's say. Um, I know that my friends were telling me about words that Bosnians use that are very unusual to Turkish ears, like the interjection super, meaning like great, sounded like very modern to it when they were using it in Turkish. So those are just some examples off the top of my head. I can't really think of any maybe more
Well, thank you. I
meaningful
didn't want to put you
examples.
on the spot, but you've marked, a lot, even by two sentences. Visual marker is, food, possibly certain customs, as you said, way of, even arranging your, interior, furniture and design and so on. And the last one was, about the friendship association, that
Mhm.
you have photographed. Do you know what is the main center of their activity?
So with the Bosnian Association, that's one thing I want to explore further. So far, it seems their main role is to organize certain kinds of community and family events. So if there's some kind of, let's say, wedding venue, often a lot of
Hmm.
these buildings serve as like wedding venues.
Yeah, because
I
those
actually
are,
tried
I
to,
assume, large weddings, right?
yeah, yeah. I tried to actually the one that I photographed, like the day that I photographed it, there was a wedding going on, and I had like traveled all the way. Like I can't explain it to you. Istanbul is huge, and Pendik is very sort of non-central, so it was like 2 hours one way from where I was living. It was just like on the train, like on the public
Hmm.
transport. It was just so long to get there. And then I'd been to some other places, so it wasn't a totally needless trip, but I came to this association and then there was a wedding going on and nobody's there. And I'm like who's working for it formally? And I'm like, okay, come
Hmm.
on. But outside of weddings, I think they might also host some, I don't know, like political maybe events. I've seen them
I
host.
was suggesting probably that they might have political and cultural events, and those might be very interesting, to see, one, the agenda, and two, the type of culture, that they're trying to maintain. And
Yeah.
I'll be very curious to, hear your observations, because those seem to be kind of a living bridge, right?
Mhm.
That goes both ways, to use the metaphor, Chris, with the buses. It might be very interesting to see, what the program is and what the accent is.
Mhm.
I would be very curious actually to look at
With
where the accent falls.
I just also want to say that with regard to that cultural element, the association in Bayrampaşa has an entire room. There's also some interesting stuff going on with gender roles that I don't think would fit into the scope of this, but the men
Mhm.
usually are kind of the association leaders. It's mostly men on like the board, while women kind of do the cultural work. So there's this room made by like a lot of Bosnian women, which sort of featured their traditional style of furniture. It was kind of like an ethno room, and a lot of like the old ethno costumes, a lot of the traditional tables, silverware, etc. So there's also that attempt to maybe preserve a certain style of like, yeah, like ethno dress. That's very important for a lot of formerly Yugoslav countries, I know, and probably Balkan too.
Thank you very much, Milena. Well, in any case, what I see is that you're having an exciting. We really hope. I'm not sure. Currently, if you can tell us, is there a lockdown in Istanbul right now, or what are the measures? What are the prospects of actually you being able to, have some of those things? Because obviously this is, a problematic sort of time, and in Europe and I'm thinking in the in the Asian part of Turkey, possibly also some complications. Would you update us on those?
Absolutely. So actually, I was in Serbia just 2 days ago. I actually was in So I was in Serbia for most of the like Zoom classes so far. I've been there since the middle of summer, spending time with my family. So so there, I mean, the situation at least hasn't had a political response, so they're allowing people to travel, and it's the same in Turkey. So the two countries can travel between each other. And actually, I just recently came here. So certainly, like, there's not a lockdown to the extent where people can't travel. However, the response of Turkey compared at least to Serbia is that if you don't wear a mask outside, you get fined like 3,000 Turkish liras, which is like a whole month's worth of minimum wage, like salary.
Is it enforced strictly?
I think I know that people fear it, definitely. So it is working, and people are wearing masks outside. So I suppose it is, yeah. I haven't been here long enough to really tell, but that's certainly like what I've been able to observe.
Well, thanks for the update and for the transnational. And I assume you were traveling by plane or by car?
I was traveling by airplane, wearing my mask. Yeah. So and I'm kind of isolating myself here.
Yeah, keep safe. In any case, I think that the overall impression of everyone is that you had a great presentation, very exciting and interesting topic. A lot of things actually to discover further on. And the reason why I was asking about those restrictions is we really hope that there will be a situation, an opportunity where you can go further with the research questions that you yourself have outlined. And I believe some of the suggestions here made today, such as the one that Chris made, and at least unmodestly one of the questions that I raised, I think could add to the value of the overall product. Thank you again for being part of Balkan Circle, and we certainly are looking forward to welcome you back once your product is finished. And we certainly look forward to hear your observations on the multiple iterations of your interactions with either online or with with the generation that is still fearing long distance calls. And I think there are a lot of kind of smiles along me and my older colleagues here that, oh yeah, we still remember that time. So Milena, once again, thank you very much. Bravo. Keep safe, keep up the good work, and we're looking forward to have you back in Balkan Circle.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who came and listened. I really, really appreciate this. It's always lovely to have an audience for presenting your obscure research.
Oh, it's not obscure, not to this group. Believe me, it's quite central to all. So thank you very much, Milena, and keep in touch with us. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Next week, we continue with Balkan Circle. And thank you for the support, understanding, and again, building up as we speak this great network from here to Istanbul and beyond.